The revival of the Eucharist. This is actually one of my favorite weeks in the diocese, because we have the Faith Formation Conference, which is really fun. For those who haven't been, it's a smattering of people from all over the diocese, from rural areas, from all around. And then a large swath of people from the metro density of Tulsa and surrounding areas. A lot of people don't think about it this way, but there's approximately 16 or 17 parishes in the metro density of Tulsa, surrounding suburbs, if you include Sand Springs, Owasso, et cetera. But we have 77 parishes overall. And so there's another, 60 to 61 parishes out there. And so this conference sort of brings everybody to Tulsa, has a number of speakers. I know this year, some of our speakers include Dr. Ted Shree, who's now back with Focus, Father Stephen Gadberry from Word on Fire, Sister Mickey Espinoza, who's from Little Rock, our very own Bishop David Konderla, Father Alberto Anguiano, he's from the Pontifical University of Mexico, and then Christy Dunn, Emily Camp, Father Gary Castle, Adam Minahan, Robert and Diane Schwind, and it's at the Renaissance here at 71st and 169 here in Tulsa, and it's really a wonderful event. And actually, I think the setting for it, the Renaissance always does a really good job for us too. It's always a nice setting for it. So definitely looking forward to it. But you'll be there for the entirety of the conference, right?
Yeah, the theme is on prayer, but I suspect I would be willing to bet you that nearly all of these speakers were at the Eucharistic revival that also happened just recently, and that will be a significant part of the focus. We used to call this the catechetical conference, and so it was, I guess maybe earlier on, it was more aimed at the catechists in the parishes. But we've changed to this idea of the Faith Formation Conference to better signify that all of us throughout our life need ongoing formation.
That's right.
One of the things that we're going to be promoting as we lower the age of confirmation and move more directly towards whole family catechesis is this idea, this notion that there's no end to the catechetical life. There's no point in our life where we can say, I finished. I learned it all.
That's right.
I'm done. Jesus is not that kind of a subject. And so the Faith Formation Conference is for everyone, because all of us need to continue to grow in our relationship with the Lord and our understanding of that relationship. Focusing on prayer will help us do that. And so, we end up with hundreds of people. We would love to have everybody that comes. We have Spanish and English sessions.
Absolutely.
And so we look forward to that every year.
Yeah, bilingual event. Definitely bilingual. And then this Sunday, we continue in John 6, as we've been going through for the last month or so.
This passage that we come to this coming Sunday, out of the whole chapter, chapter 6 of John's Gospel, in a lot of ways, this passage is my favorite part of that chapter. So let me just read through it. Many of Jesus' disciples who were listening said, "This saying is hard. Who can accept it?" And since Jesus knew that his disciples were murmuring about this, he said to them, "Does this shock you? What if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit that gives life, while the flesh is of no avail. The words I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But there are some of you who do not believe." Jesus knew from the beginning the ones who would not believe and the one who would betray him. And he said, "For this reason I have told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted him by my Father." As a result of this, many of his disciples returned to their former way of life and no longer accompanied him. Jesus then said to the 12, "Do you also want to leave?" Simon Peter answered him, Master, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and are convinced that you are the Holy One of God. So thus far in John 6, this final little paragraph, as a result of this, many of his disciples returned to their former way of life and no longer accompanied him. One of the things that teaches us, the fact that Jesus didn't run after them and say, now look, you've misunderstood me. I wasn't meaning really.
I'm sorry.
I'm just being symbolic here with my language. He didn't do that because he couldn't do that, because he really was going to do what he said. I'm going to give you my flesh and blood, and you're going to eat and drink, and you'll have my life in you. Well, that's one thing that it teaches us, is the reality of what he meant, the literal nature of what he was trying to teach them. But the other thing I think that it helps us to reflect on is, in an age where many people leave the church, and we talk about that sometimes, we talk about people who describe themselves as nuns, which means they reach sort of young adulthood. Sometimes it happens even in their teens. They quit going to Mass, they quit going to church, and they say of themselves that they're none of the above. I'm not Catholic, I'm not Protestant, I'm not Jewish, I'm just spiritual, or whatever it is that they say. This is sort of our first seeing of something like that in the gospel. The disciples here learn something from Jesus that he wants to do that just seems to them impossible.
Right.
You can't mean this. You can't be serious. And they're not yet able, they're not willing to put their faith in him as Lord, which means he can do anything he says, and he will do everything he says. And so they walk away from him. Now, the interesting question is, how many of them, on hearing of the resurrection, came back? Because the resurrection is the key to everything that has to do with Jesus. How many of them who left thinking, he's asking us to become cannibals? We can't do that. That's against our Jewish religion. When they heard of the resurrection, realized he really was God. He really is God. He really is who he said he was all along. Only God could rise from the dead. And so then came back and experienced the Eucharist in its earliest form at the time. And then finally, Peter, who responds to everyone who has faith in Christ, who believes that God is with them, but who faces something in life that is just hard to deal with. It could be someone who finds some teaching of the church just really impossible to accept. It could be someone who's experiencing a tremendous grief, personally or among someone that they love, a sickness, a death. But in such cases, such people might say this very prayer, Master, to whom shall we go? This is happening. I don't understand why it's happening. I'm not sure I know how to deal with it. But I believe that you are God. I believe that you are with me. I believe that the church is your body, even though it's filled with all these crazy people. And even though some of the people in it are mean to me, say things that they shouldn't say to me. Even though all of those things are true, I believe that it's you, and so I'm going to stay. I'm going to continue. We give God room to work in our life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those are some thoughts as we approach this really challenging and wonderful gospel.
It's amazing. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth, but this question of him, when he asks them sort of later in the gospel, do you also want to leave? Mm-hmm. And I could have the wrong emphasis on the words there as Christ himself said it, but, he could have said, do you also want to leave, or do you also want to leave? He could have said all sorts of different ways, but I just think it's interesting that he would ask that question, kind of giving the opportunity, sort of in a way, kind of saying, hey, the door is there. the opportunity to sort of to walk, I guess, is there. So
he's trying to teach them always. You remember, he also will ask Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" And so we talk about why 3 times, and it helps to erase in Peter's own heart the 3-time denial that he made of Jesus. And so here, Jesus knows that they're not going to leave him because Jesus is God. He knows these things. So he asks them, "Do you also want to leave?" less for himself to learn something about them new, and more so that he can set Simon up to say this. "Master, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and are convinced that you are the Holy One of God." What does that have to do with the Eucharist? What does that have to do with eating his body and blood? They don't yet know what form that's going to take. This is before the Last Supper. But they're willing to take him at his word, and that's what he's looking for. That whatever it is, they'll be able to do it because he's going to make it possible. And that's what he's looking for. And he's looking for that from us. He doesn't want us to be disciples who are his disciples because so far we haven't been challenged. So far nothing has happened to shake our faith. He wants us to be his disciples because we believe he's God and love him. And in the context of that relationship, whatever happens, we'll be able to get through it because we're with him. I told the story about the woman in the ICU whose grandson died, and I was there present, and thinking that she might simply just have a crisis of faith, a kind of a meltdown, because she didn't believe, she thoroughly believed that God would heal her grandson. And he didn't, not by restoring his human life anyway. But she immediately turned to words of thanksgiving and praise and prayer for the sake of the family because they had him and because of what he had meant to them and because that he would be with Jesus. That's a woman who nothing can scare her, you know. When you have that kind of power, what can you fear in the world? There's nothing nothing you have to fear.
Yeah. Yeah, seeing life as a gift, right? We talked about that before. I know we have, but seeing everything as a gift. And I would dare to say that woman who I've never met probably sees everything as a gift from God.
Yeah.
Because you have to start from gratitude if you're going to.
And it's not to say, this is really important too, that faith does not make us immune to emotion. We're not robots. So, you know, if somebody I love is facing peril because of an illness, let's say, I'm going to be praying and I'm going to trust that God will take care of whatever we need, but I'm going to be scared. I'm going to feel fear. I'm going to feel grief. I'm going to feel those things because those things are human and appropriate to the situation. So it doesn't mean that, but it does mean that I don't lose my faith over things. And I don't worry that I might lose my faith over things. Mm-hmm. I recognize that God will take care of this. Yeah, so this all comes, both the Faith Formation Conference and this gospel, all of it follows on the Eucharistic Congress. I was one of the fortunate participants who was there.
One of like 60,000.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. It was the first time in, I get these facts a little bit mixed up. But I think I'm correct in saying it was the first time in about 40 years that we had in the United States a Eucharistic Congress for the country. One of the things that has come about because of this Eucharistic Congress is that a nonprofit board was established to run the build-up to the conference and the running of it. And that board has now voted and decided to continue to exist, to continue in existence, as a board that will be able to put on a Eucharistic Congress about every 10 years. And so it's going to continue on. So it was announced at this Eucharistic Congress that the next one would happen in 2033. So if you missed your opportunity here, then come make plans for 2033.
Wow.
When I arrived on a Wednesday, so I was like, a little bit late getting there.
It was Wednesday to Sunday. Is that right? It was Wednesday to Sunday.
Wednesday to Sunday. The first thing I saw was a line wrapping all the way around to the convention center of people trying to check in. That was the check-in line. And admittedly, there was that was the one sort of big snafu that they had logistically. It took too long to get everybody checked in and get your credentials and all that. So they took care of that in a creative way, and so everybody was able to get into the talks that evening and all the rest of it. They had a reconciliation room set up with 70 stations for reconciliation. And, all the priests that were there and the bishops that were there could go on to a website place where you could sign up for times. In, what's his name, Michael Schmitz?
Father Mike Schmitz.
Father Mike Schmitz. He said in his talk that there's no revival without reconciliation. There's no revival without repentance. And I experienced that in that reconciliation room because I heard a total of about 20 hours of confessions over the next 2.5 days. And I ended up not going to the talks because I was just in the confessional room. But I heard the talks through the confessions, just in the sense that people were coming. The people that were coming to receive absolution were often talking about things they were hearing in the conference, in the talks and in the mass, the homilies.
The talk was bringing out a realization for them and helping them reflect.
Yeah. And so, yes, there were plenty of people who were coming to confession who hadn't been to confession in many, many years.
It's amazing.
But there were people who were regular goers to confession, but who recognized through the talks and things that there was something they hadn't dealt with yet and that they needed to deal with. And so they were bringing that. So that was very, very powerful. When it came to the final Mass on Sunday morning, they had the bishop's vest in the locker rooms.
So the football stadium?
Yeah, so we're in the football stadium, Lucas Oil Stadium. And, football stadiums have the home locker room and the visitor locker room. So we were all in these locker rooms, and we each had our own locker with a magnetic name plate on it, with our name on the locker.
That sounds fancy.
So that was kind of funny to be vesting in the locker room. But that's what we did. And then, of course, the Mass was amazing. The one troubling aspect for the people sitting on the stage of the Mass was that the sound system was such that we didn't have a monitor aimed at us. All the speakers and the monitors were aimed out, and they were all, of course, optimized to handle the echo, because in a place like that, there's tremendous echo. So it was hard for us to make out what was being said through any of the microphones on the stage. The homily, the prayers at the Mass, and so forth.
Just the way it was directed.
Yeah, because the echo, what we were hearing was about 3 different re-echoes of whatever was said, so it gets mixed up. And then at the very end, when Bishop Cousins was making his final remarks, we couldn't understand that at all. It was just fuzz. And so that was the one downside. Listening to the homily, which I enjoyed, the Cardinal did a great job with the homily. I was listening to it 3 times because
the speakers.
Your brain is having to cut out the other 2 echoes so that you can just think on the one set of words, If you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're hearing that 3 times. So you have to pick one of the 1, 2, 3, 4, one of the streams,
right,
and try to focus in on that so you can get what's being said.
That's kind of wild. Do you think the crowd heard it fine?
No, the crowd heard it fine.
Got it.
As I say, it was optimized for the stadium, And has to be, you know, a space like that, the sound acoustics have to be amazing.
Yeah.
To manage all the different echo spots.
Were the priests and bishops up on the stage, essentially?
The bishops were.
The bishops were, but the priests were probably.
The priests and the deacons were right down in front,
okay,
just below the stage, and so they had all the sound things aimed at them, so that worked out fine. The procession, there was a large Eucharistic procession, and it went for about a mile.
Yeah.
And, you know, people can find it online, actually, you know, time lapse of it. But it was more than the 60,000 people that came for the revival. It was also the local people, some of whom came for the revival and some who didn't. And I was going to walk in the procession because I thought they would close the confessions down during the procession, but they didn't close the confessions down. So I kept
people
going.
were still going to confession.
Well, in fact, even more came because they were
thought,
thinking,
you know what?
Oh, this might be a good opportunity, because the line was long to get into confessions. Even with 70 stations, oftentimes the line was out the door and down the hall, and so they thought, hey, let me try, and so we just stayed in there.
And as a rule of thumb, for those who haven't attended a conference with tens of thousands, I've been fortunate enough to attend a Catholic conference with 25,000. There is always a good time to go because there is so many priests and bishops available. And that room is so big that they move people through those lines really quickly.
Yeah.
And they really do a great job with volunteers to make sure that everybody's moving and stuff. It's amazing to see a room. I've been in a room with 70 priests offering reconciliation to 70 different individuals at once. It is amazingly powerful to see that from a spiritual side, but also just to see the line. That line is 4 people wide and a mile long, but that line is constantly moving.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's just amazing to see. And so to see that constant movement of the line. So there really is it's always a good time to go at those conferences because the line usually moves. But that's funny that people during the actual procession.
One of the logistical things of this kind of a setup is you need people at the head of the line who are directing people. Okay, there's one. Okay, there's one. Okay, there's one. That one's open. That one's open.
Yeah.
You have to have several people doing that. Otherwise, you know, there would be times when I would be finished with a penitent, put my hand up, and be waiting for a minute or so for them to see that I'm open and to send someone my way.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that, then with 70 people in there, plus 70 penitents, it's crowded. It's hard to tell who's open, where can I go? And so one of the things that they came up with to help that process was these light swords, these light clubs. It's sort of like the ones, you know, they use at the airport to bring the planes.
Oh, sure.
In. And one switch would make them go green and one switch would make them go red. And so it was a number of sisters in the room who were doing this. The nuns were doing okay, over here, bring someone over here, bring.
That's kind of fun.
And they're waving these wands. And so I thought, you know, if somebody had a picture of this, I would caption it, lightsaber-wielding nuns direct penitents to do their confessions. Because it just looked like they were...
I know all I was thinking about the whole time when you were talking about that is just like auctioneers, you know, like auctioneers. But you couldn't have an auctioneer. You'd have to have a quiet auctioneer, you know. I'm just imagining some big guy with a big belt buckle and a cowboy hat on sitting in the front just, ha, ha, you know, how they did the auctions and just like.
Here's what.
Yeah, so anyways, that's beautiful. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome. Now, you know, as always with anything like this, same for retreats, same for anything.
Yeah.
The point of such events is to go up on the mountain. The disciples went with Jesus up on Mount Tabor to experience his transfiguration, but you can't live on the mountain. There's not enough air up there. There's no water. There's no food. You got to come back down into the valley of your life. So there's always the challenge. What am I going to take from this to change my life as I move back down into the valley? And so for all of us in the church in the U.S., we can allow ourselves to be encouraged by the revival to deepen our relationship with Christ in the Eucharist. That comes, through the celebration of the Eucharist, but also through spending time in prayer and adoration. Adoration is a very rich way to pray, a way to be close to Christ as we experience him in John 6, who's promising to give himself to us in this most intimate way. And so that will be what we're challenged to do coming out of this Eucharistic revival. The people that went are coming back as missionaries. They're people who are wanting to think, how can I encourage others? How can I share with others the gift of the Eucharist that I've received?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, the classic sort of retreat experiences, you go and you have a high, you have the retreat high, and you come back, and it's like, well, and then life gets busy, you go back to work, and things get going again, and how do we fight that? How do you fight that? Because I think it's, I just think about my life right now. I mean, school starts next, it's just started up, I guess. And, just things are busy and you got to get the kids places, but how do you fight sort of that? And I don't know.
Yeah, I think one way is to recognize that it's going to happen. So to not be naive and think, wow, the way I feel now, while I'm here at this conference with 60,000 people, seeing an entire football stadium filled with people in adoration, that I'm not going to feel this way when I get home a week from now. To recognize that's okay. That's part of what I mean by we don't live on top of the mountain. There's nothing wrong with the fact that we don't live on top of the mountain. We're not designed to live on top of the mountain. But to make some kind of simple resolution, and it should be simple, not like what we do at New Year's where we promise the moon that I'm going to do this year. And then we, of course, by March, we quit doing all of it because we promised too much. If we promise a simple thing, if we resolve to change something simple, we'll do that. We can do that. And so that would be my recommendation, is to do something simple, baby steps, take a baby step towards a deeper life in the Eucharist.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
What are practical ways that we can unite ourselves in the Eucharist? Whether it be as simple as going to Mass or, spending time in adoration. I know we've talked before about the importance of the Mass and sort of not just adoration. We've been,
Mm-hmm.
I know at most of the parishes, if not all, have been offering Eucharistic adoration at a much more increased capacity than they usually do in this season. But do you have any practical tips for how we can unite ourselves better with the Eucharist?
The Vatican Council talked about the conscious and active participation of the faithful, right? And so I think a missed opportunity that people could take advantage of is to just take a few minutes, maybe before you go to Mass, because if you've got 6 kids and you're getting to Mass, just getting everybody into the pew, quieted down, settled, Mass is starting.
Well, Mass starts before we get to the pew, Bishop.
Or, I wasn't going to say that, but I know the Lissy way. But even before you go, could even be the day before, could be the night before, could be right when you get there and you've got a couple of moments to pray, to formulate in your own mind, what is my offering? The priest is coming to offer the Mass. He's coming to offer the body and blood of Christ to the faithful. He has an offering. What is my offering? What am I bringing to place on the altar? It's mostly going to be people. Who am I coming to Mass to pray for? Who has asked me this week to remember their needs or their special concerns? If I formulate that intention, now I've got a mission. So when we talk about how do I keep the Mass, something that's so familiar, from becoming boring or from me perceiving it as being boring, one way is to approach the Mass with a mission. I'm going because I've got something I got to do there.
Right.
I've got these people that I need to put on that altar and pray for. So I think that's a simple and a practical way. And it's a way you can get kids involved too,
How are you preparing?
Yeah. Well, who are you bringing? Who are you bringing to Mass this week? Teaching them to do that and what it means and how to do it. Then, they may start to think that, okay, oh, we got to go because I got these people to bring.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Any other ideas on how to invite people into the mystery of the Eucharist or invite people into the real
I don't
presence?
think it needs to be complicated. I think just inviting them. Don't worry about the fact that, you're inviting your coworker, let's say. Would you enjoy, maybe you'd like to come with me and my family to Mass this weekend. They're not Catholic, maybe. Okay, well, you can explain to them what goes on and how to approach communion if they want to or not. But just let them experience it and, go to breakfast afterwards and answer questions or whatever.
I think that flows a lot into sort of this time and moving from Christendom to apostolic mission, as we've constantly been talking about here at the Chancery or around the diocese, referencing Monsignor Shea's book that he wrote. But I think it's our Protestant brothers and sisters, it's so natural. I know that around Holy Week, I'm going to have multiple neighbors in my neighborhood invite me to their churches. And it's almost a normal thing for me to receive that invitation. And I don't think it's, I'm not offended by it. I don't think it's crazy. I almost expect it. And I go, oh, what's the church? And, of course, as Catholics, if you're a practicing Catholic and somebody says that and you go, oh, well, you can come to our church. We got 3 of these masses on Holy Week, that you can attend, not just, one essentially. And then everybody goes, whoa, all right. And so I think it is just good to note the sort of the naturalness that we've talked about before, having a naturalness in the way that we invite. But invitation is key, and I think it's not it's not fun or new age, or it's not super techie. It's just lather, rinse, repeat. Just consistent, joyful invitation.
But maybe even before invitation is relationship. So it behooves us to be Christians in the way that we love our neighbor. And so forming relationships with people, sharing life and experience with people, that then opens the door to inviting someone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. Beautiful. Great thoughts. This has been Tulsa Time with Bishop David Konderla. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.